Welcome back, friends. Tonight, you're stepping into the dark domain where familiar places become anything but safe, and the ordinary twists into something far darker. So sit back, turn off the lights, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to join us in the shadows. Because let's be honest, you won't be sleeping tonight anyway. The last heat wave. It started as an unseasonable warm front. By the end of August, the temperature in Phoenix had already spiked well above the usual heat of late summer, pushing 120 degrees and showing no signs of cooling. People shrugged it off at first, calling it another bad season in the desert. But by the time September came and went without a single cool day, everything began to change. Unprecedented heat, the news stations called it, cycling through dire warnings as temperatures continued to soar. The power grid strained under the constant demand, and the air became thick, pressing down on us as if the whole city was being smothered under an invisible blanket. The heat felt inescapable, seeping through walls and windows, radiating up from the streets. I remember standing outside my apartment building one evening, staring at the unnatural red glow of the sunset as it bled over the skyline. The silence was unsettling. There were no sounds of traffic or chatter, only the low hum of air conditioners struggling against the relentless temperatures. I worked as a graphic designer at a small firm downtown. Deadlines loomed, but work had slowed to a crawl as more of us fell ill, succumbing to dehydration, nausea, and exhaustion. Even those of us who stayed began to deteriorate. Our skin cracked and our throats parched. Each day, fewer people showed up, and the emptiness in the office grew more oppressive, mirroring the desolate streets outside. One night, as I lay in bed struggling to sleep, I noticed a strange quiet. The usual hum of my ceiling fan was gone. I sat up, checked the breaker, but everything was fine. Peering outside, I realized that the entire block was dark. The power had gone out, leaving us vulnerable to the night's suffocating heat. Power outages had become more common, but that night, everything felt different. The silence was thicker, the darkness deeper, as though the city itself were sinking into a void. The next morning, I decided to venture outside to see if I could find some answers. The sky was an unnatural orange, the sun hanging low, casting long, warped shadows over the nearly deserted streets. The air was thick with a strange metallic tang that made me gag, the scent of overheated asphalt and something sharper like singed metal. As I walked, I saw the few people still outside wore expressions of desperation and fear. I passed a woman sitting on her stoop, muttering to herself, rocking back and forth, her skin blotched with sunburn. Her cracked lips barely moved as she whispered something over and over, her hollow eyes fixed somewhere distant. She caught my gaze for a moment, and I felt a chill run through me, a look of pure despair, as if she were trying to warn me of something beyond words. I kept walking, my heart pounding with a sense of urgency. The streets felt foreign, twisted. Familiar landmarks now seemed distorted, out of place. At one point, I passed a digital billboard that usually displayed ads for local businesses, but now only showed one word, flashing over and over in a relentless loop. Hotter. Hotter. I pressed on, determined to reach the city center and find out if anyone knew what was happening. But with each step, the heat seemed to grow thicker, denser, like wading through invisible waves. The sky darkened further, shifting from orange to a deep, sickly red, casting an unnatural glow over the empty buildings. Finally, I reached downtown, but the streets were empty. Office buildings loomed above, their glass windows shattered, as if they'd buckled under the weight of the heat. I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as though I were trapped in a dream I couldn't wake from. I tried calling out, my voice weak, swallowed by the oppressive heat. Then I saw him, a man standing in the middle of the square, motionless, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He looked like he'd been standing there for hours, his skin pale, his face drawn, his eyes hollow and unseeing. I approached him, the heat pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. "Do you know what's happening?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, crackling from the dryness in my throat. He turned slowly, his gaze empty, as if he were looking through me. "The world's moving closer," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "Closer to the sun. Each day it's a little nearer, until there's nothing left but heat." I backed away, my heart pounding. "That's impossible. It's just a heat wave. It'll pass." He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his cracked lips. "No, this is the new normal. Each day's hotter than the last. The sun's coming for us, and there's no stopping it." As he spoke, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a sinking realization that what he was saying might actually be true. The world itself felt wrong, twisted. The atmosphere seemed thinner, the air itself fragile, like it could break apart at any moment. Panicking, I turned and fled, desperate to escape the crushing weight of that unbearable truth. But no matter where I went, the heat followed, pressing down, choking the life from everything it touched. The trees were dead, their leaves shriveled and blackened. Cars sat abandoned, their metal frames scorching to the touch. When I finally made it back to my apartment, I locked the door, barricading myself inside, as if that could keep the heat at bay. But the walls felt warm, the floor hot beneath my feet, the air thick and stifling. I closed all the blinds, trying to block out the blazing light, but it seeped through, filling the room with that dim, reddish glow. The days blurred together, each one hotter than the last, each one filling me with a growing sense of despair. The air was thick and still, the silence broken only by the occasional sound of something collapsing outside, metal bending, wood cracking, as though the entire city were crumbling in the relentless heat. One night I had a dream, or perhaps it was a hallucination, brought on by the suffocating heat. I found myself standing outside, staring up at the sky, where the sun hung, a massive red orb that seemed closer than ever, its rays reaching down like fingers, casting everything in an eerie, blood-colored light. I felt its heat, a tangible weight pressing down on me, filling me with a dread so profound I could barely breathe. When I woke, I found my skin blistered as if burned by the dream. I lay in bed, my mind racing, my body aching with exhaustion, with the unbearable weight of the heat that seemed to seep into my bones. Now I barely leave my apartment, barely sleep, haunted by dreams of the sun growing closer, of the world slowly burning away, leaving nothing but ashes and silence. The heat is everywhere, inescapable, a reminder that we're all living on borrowed time. Sometimes I still hear the man's voice echoing in my mind, a faint whisper that fills the empty silence, warning me of the inevitable. The world's moving closer, closer to the sun. And I know deep down that he's right, because every day is hotter than the last. Every day the sun feels a little nearer, a little hungrier. And no matter where we go, no matter how we try to hide, it's coming for us. The faces I can't escape. It started as a parlor trick, something I'd show friends at parties, a gimmick that amused everyone and left me feeling like I had a unique advantage in life. I'd look in the mirror, close my eyes, and when I opened them, I could change my appearance entirely. Any face, any expression. I had the strange ability to morph my features, to look like someone else down to the smallest detail. I never understood how or why I could do it, but I never questioned it either. It was just something I did for fun. When I moved to Detroit last year, I thought it might be time to put this skill to real use. After struggling to find work, I figured I could use my gift to get ahead. I started using different faces, different personalities to land freelance gigs, even a few side hustles in places that didn't ask too many questions. No one ever suspected that the man they met on Monday was the same man they saw on Wednesday with a different face and name. Things were going well. I'd started lining up high-paying jobs under multiple aliases and was living better than I ever had. But one night, things took a turn. It was a rainy evening, and I was walking back to my apartment after closing a deal with a local businessman who'd hired Nick, one of my personas, to investigate a potential investment. As I passed a row of shop windows, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass. Only, It wasn't me. I mean, it was me, but not the me I thought I was. The face staring back at me wasn't Nick's or my own. It was a stranger's face, one I'd never used before, gaunt, pale, with dark, sunken eyes and a cruel, twisted mouth. I blinked and the face was gone, replaced by my usual appearance. I chalked it up to fatigue, a trick of the rain-streaked glass, and went home, trying to shake the unease that gnawed at the edges of my mind. But the next day it happened again, this time in the bathroom mirror. I glanced up after washing my hands, and the face looking back at me wasn't mine. It was the same pale, haunting face, watching me with a grim intensity that made my skin crawl. I backed away, rubbing my eyes, and when I looked again, my reflection was normal. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just stress, a side effect of too many late nights. But the faces didn't stop. Every day I'd see a new face, a stranger's face staring back at me from mirrors, windows, even the polished surface of a coffee shop counter. Each one had the same hollow eyes, the same twisted expression, as if they were taunting me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. And with each new face, I felt a growing dread, a sense that something was terribly, horribly wrong. One night, I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection, daring it to change. I closed my eyes, focused, and when I opened them, the stranger was there, watching me, his eyes dark, filled with a malice I couldn't understand. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The reflection tilted its head, a slow, mocking smile spreading across its face. "I am you," it said, its voice a hollow echo, as if spoken from a distance. "The real you." I stumbled back, heart racing, but the reflection didn't move. It stared at me, its eyes unblinking, its smile widening, twisting into something dark, something inhuman. From that night on, I couldn't escape the faces. They followed me everywhere, their expressions growing darker, more menacing, each one a twisted version of myself. They'd appear in brief flashes, in reflections, in shadows, always watching, always waiting. Then one night as I walked home, I saw him again. The first face, the gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger, standing at the end of an alley, half hidden in shadow. My heart pounded as he raised a hand, beckoning me, his smile cold and cruel. I wanted to run, but something compelled me to follow, to understand who he was, what he wanted. I stepped into the alley, my footsteps echoing against the brick walls, the darkness closing in around me. "Who are you?" I called, my voice trembling. The figure took a step closer, his face illuminated by a faint, eerie light. "I am you," he repeated, his voice a low, mocking whisper. "The face you wear when no one's watching." I shook my head, backing away, but he followed, his eyes gleaming with a twisted joy. "You've worn so many faces, told so many lies," he said, his voice filled with a quiet rage. "But you can't hide from yourself." I stumbled back, my mind racing, fragments of memories flooding my mind. Every face I'd ever worn, every lie I'd ever told, each one flashing before me, each one a reminder of the life I'd built on deception, on stolen identities. And then I understood. The faces weren't just strangers. They were me, versions of myself that I'd hidden away, each one a piece of the life I'd stolen, a life built on borrowed names, borrowed faces. And now, they were coming for me, demanding their due. I turned to run, but the alley seemed to stretch, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down, suffocating. The faces appeared all around me, their eyes hollow, their expressions twisted with anger, with vengeance. "You wanted to be everyone," they whispered, their voices overlapping, filling the air with a haunting chorus. "Now, you'll be no one." I screamed, stumbling out of the alley, my heart pounding as I fled, desperate to escape the faces, the voices. But they followed, their whispers filling my mind, haunting my every step, reminding me of the life I'd built on lies, on borrowed faces. Now every time I look in the mirror, I see them, faces I don't recognize, faces that aren't mine, each one a reminder of the life I stole, the identity I'll never truly have. And every night, as I lie in bed, I hear their whispers, soft and relentless, a reminder that I can't escape them, that I can't escape myself. Because when you wear too many faces, you forget which one is yours. And now I am nothing but a collection of borrowed identities, a ghost haunting the shadows, trapped between faces that were never mine to begin with. The Mirror House. It started with the dream. I found myself standing in front of my home in Chicago, but something was off. The sky looked wrong, tinged with a purplish haze, and my house appeared different, like a version painted from memory. Even stranger was the feeling that I was being watched, observed by something beyond my understanding. I woke up in a cold sweat, brushing it off as just a nightmare. I was a surgeon, used to the stress of long shifts and the occasional bad dream. But over the next few days, that feeling that something wasn't right followed me everywhere. Faces on the street seemed familiar yet distant. My co-workers' laughter echoed strangely, and my house, my safe place, felt somehow foreign. One evening, as I stepped out of my car, I saw a light flickering in the upstairs window. My wife, Laura, and our daughter, Chloe, were visiting her mother, and I knew no one else was inside. Still, the light pulsed on and off, casting strange shadows through the curtains. My heart pounded as I walked up the steps and unlocked the door. I called out, but only the empty silence greeted me. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps heavy, following the light to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I saw a figure sitting on the bed. A man with his back to me, hunched over, staring into his hands. Who are you?" I stammered, barely able to force the words out. The figure turned, and my heart froze. He had my face. I staggered back, my mind reeling as I took in the impossible. The man staring back at me had the same eyes, the same lines around his mouth, the same scar above his left brow from when I'd fallen off a bike as a kid. But there was something hollow in his expression, a vacancy in his gaze that made him seem less than human. "I don't belong here," he said, his voice a haunting echo of mine. Before I could respond, he stood up, passing by me as if I weren't even there, leaving me alone in the room. I wanted to run after him, to demand answers, but my legs felt like lead. I slumped onto the bed, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? Was the exhaustion finally getting to me? But as the days passed, strange events started happening with unsettling regularity. People around me began acting differently. Laura would forget things she'd known for years, like the day we met or the name of our favorite restaurant. I'd hear her laughing in the kitchen, only to find her expression vacant when I asked what was so funny. My daughter, Chloe, who had always been a bundle of energy, suddenly seemed withdrawn, staring out the window with an intensity that made my skin crawl. And then there were the other things, small, subtle changes that were easy to dismiss if they didn't keep piling up. Street signs were in slightly different places, or the wording was wrong, like they'd been replaced by poor imitations. My favorite mug, chipped from years of use, was suddenly flawless, and the front door creaked differently when it opened. But the worst of it all was the mirror. One night, as I brushed my teeth, I looked up and caught my reflection staring back with an intensity I'd never seen. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I moved to put my toothbrush away, my reflection stayed frozen, watching me. Chills ran down my spine as I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just exhaustion. But then it smiled, a slow, sinister grin that felt nothing like my own. It was a smile of malice, a silent promise that it knew more about me than I'd ever know about myself. The next day, I threw a sheet over the mirror, hoping to escape the gnawing dread that had taken root in my stomach. But it didn't help. I started seeing him everywhere. My double, lurking just at the edge of my vision, slipping out of sight the moment I turned my head. I confided in Laura, but she dismissed it as stress, assuring me that I just needed rest. Maybe a vacation, she suggested, but her words felt hollow, as though she were reciting lines from a script. Desperate, I reached out to an old friend, Dr. Harper, who specialized in neurology. He agreed to run some tests, hoping to help me make sense of the situation. After hours of scans and questions, he handed me the results with a concerned expression. "There's something unusual in your neural patterns," he said, his tone hesitant. "It's almost like they're doubling." "Doubling?" I asked, feeling the room spin. He nodded. "It's as if another version of you is trying to overlap with your consciousness. I don't know how else to explain it." As I left his office, a new horror dawned on me. The possibility that I was no longer in the world I knew. Maybe I was trapped in a mirror version of my life, a twisted parallel reality where everything looked the same but was fundamentally wrong. In the following weeks, my double grew bolder. I'd catch him in the reflections of shop windows, lurking behind me in photographs, even appearing in the rearview mirror as I drove. Each time he'd smile that same hollow smile, a silent mockery of my fear. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I returned to the mirror in my bedroom, ripping off the sheet to confront him. There he was, standing there, my twisted reflection grinning with a cruel satisfaction. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. His smile widened. "This world was mine once," he said, his voice an eerie echo of my own. "But when I stepped out, I got lost. You replaced me. Now it's time for me to come home." I stumbled back, dread curling in my stomach. "No, you can't." But he just laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the room. "You've already let me in. Every moment you doubted, every flicker of fear. You've weakened the boundary between us." Before I could react, he reached through the mirror, his hand cold and solid as it gripped my wrist, pulling me forward. I tried to fight, but his strength was overwhelming, an unstoppable force dragging me into the glass. As I struggled, I felt myself slipping, my vision blurring as my surroundings warped. And then, in an instant, I was staring out from the other side of the mirror, looking into my own terrified eyes. I pounded on the glass, shouting, but he just smirked, watching as I screamed, my words muffled by the silent prison of the mirror. He leaned close, his voice a mocking whisper. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of your life." He turned and walked away, leaving me trapped in the cold, silent world of the reflection. I watched helplessly as he took my place, moving through my life as though he'd always belonged, his eyes glinting with a dark satisfaction. Now I'm forced to watch, a silent observer as he lives out my life. Every night I press my hand against the glass, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone will see me. But I know the truth. I'm trapped in the mirror, replaced by the version of myself who never left, the one who's finally come home to stay. Thank you for joining us in the dark domain. If these stories left you with more questions than answers, make sure to hit subscribe. We're only just beginning. And remember, the shadows are closer than you think. Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.